welcome back. For those of you who are new to this channel, I'm Chris the Archaeologist. I'm a PhD candidate and archaeologist focusing on proving archaeology, and I'm covering the Collector's Edition Globe for the Indiana Jones and the Great Circle that is coming out very soon. And so I've already pre-ordered mine, and I can't wait to get started on it when it finally comes. I'm over in Canada, so hopefully shipping doesn't take too long. But yeah, I've noticed that on the globe itself, based off of the photos that have been released in the past year, that there are some sites that aren't levels in the actual trailers or any other footage that we've seen, really. So it might be worth kind of giving you a rundown on what these sites are, what it could mean in the game itself, and how it might fit together. Because I think one of the big things that we still don't know what it is, it's the actual MacGuffin, right? What are these stones, these all-maker stones that it's also in the Collector's Edition. And so more images recently, I think it was on Instagram that these were released. I guess it's now been at least a month, and I think these will give us the complete set of sites that constitute this Great Circle. And a bunch of people have already discussed a little bit of this on Reddit, I believe, but we've never known the other side of this globe, and also in some of the old footage, planes covering one of the ones in Africa. But in the new footage, we actually do have a clear idea of what that is, and also the other side of the globe as well. Here are the other components of it. We actually go from Africa into the Middle East, into Southeast Asia, and then up and down over towards Peru and back around the circle. There's still at least one site that I haven't been able to identify, and it's somewhere near Australia and New Zealand and Papua New Guinea. It could be New Caledonia, could be Vanuatu, could be the Solomon Islands, or even Fiji. So I'm actually not quite clear what that could be exactly. Now that said, I should give a preliminary caveat between fiction and reality. Just ethically speaking, I should, as an archaeologist. While it is used as a plot device, it isn't really real, per se. Now, game developers actually use their own unique set of sites, and they're actually more unique sites than they are important at a global scale. So not all of these are the most well-known or historically significant sites. Some of them are. Giza, Persepolis are kind of almost every archaeology textbook, but not many of the others. And so even though they're using the Great Circle, they are neither using the more pseudoscientific kind of fringe theory of the Great Circle, which really is on the fringe of even fringe. After looking into it, it's not even the same set of sites, so which may show a degree of intention, or maybe they're just looking at a very specific person's set of sites. Perfect circles don't really exist. Globes are abstract projections and subject to different biases, either because of spaces for place names or to avoid just having a lot of empty space, right? If you really want to represent the globe more accurately, you'd have a lot of water on the globe, and that would be a lot of empty space that you can't really put names on, right? As long as you minimize the amount of ocean that's actually on the globe, it can be kind of a teaching tool that you can use in a classroom or reference certain locations if you're just looking up a place back in the day before the internet, and if you didn't have like a bunch of atlases. And yeah, it could also be politics. Right? Sometimes certain countries focus on their own country as being bigger than another one, or their own region of the world. Globes in North America and the UK can be a little bit different from those in, let's say, in Asia or Eurasia. So there's an element of that as well. Mechanical or technical flaws could also be the case. Maps and globes used to be made and measured by hand. More importantly, drawing any lines across a globe will get you something, because we have lots of cultures, thousands of years of history, even hundreds of thousands of years of history, and some bunch of important sites or ritually significant sacred sites to some group. You'll probably hit it if you just spin a globe and you throw a dart at it. You'll probably get some place that would be somewhat sacred to some group, unless you hit the ocean. Then again, the ocean's also ritually significant to a lot of cultures anyways. Also, of course, there are actual geospatial and archaeoastronomical significances to some sites and some cultures, but they're usually limited in scale or scope, not really across continents per se. So, for example, the Inca CK shrine system in Peru. When the Inca Empire conquered different territories, they would subject all the kind of sacred deities, figures, the wakas, sometimes they're called, and link them into shrines to the capital of Cusco. So yes, things like this do exist in some ways, but not like this great circle, rather. But different empires, different cultures do create networks of sacred locations. So that is something to keep in mind. I won't kind of go into that too much to me. Now, honestly, I think half of you, most people are interested in listening to me ramble about that anyways. So, interestingly, not on this map are several of the known levels that we do have, right? And so I would think that based off of what we're seeing in Marshall College and in the Himalayas, that there are displaced objects that were originally from the sites on this globe, but have been relocated elsewhere by other people. We see this with the Siwa cat at Marshall College. In Himalayas, we have that stone that's in the hands of the dead man on that ship, and we don't have much more information about Shanghai yet, or possibly Shanghai. That technically hasn't been confirmed per se, other than concept art, I think, and the bit of footage that we see of the dogfight. So it's possible that those are all one way to get around maybe having a great circle, but wanting to place levels in other locations that are not strictly on this line is to basically just have them displace. Put them in another location where you really want players to visit, or you really want to divot sign levels around, basically. Another level that's not on this map is the South American Temple from Raiders of Lost Ark. It seems that we will be getting a whole level that's dedicated to recreating that opening sequence. In the movie itself, it's just South America 1936. In the canon after the movie was released, it has been called the Chachapoyan Temple. I generally just call it the South American Temple because, as an Andeanist, I am nitpicky as hell about calling it that, because I do have colleagues and friends that do work in Chachapoyas, and it doesn't look anything like what's in the opening scene. In fact, it does look more like another site known as Shavin the Wantar, and if you've watched my other videos, I've mentioned that a few times already, and I'll probably make a video on that. So it's an amazing site. I've been to it, and it does have an underground labyrinth of tunnels that lead to a giant fanged figure. But yeah, anyways, there are also no Javitos in Chachapoyas as well. But it is clearly going to be part of the game, and so it is possible, as others have mentioned, the Indiana Jones Nerd, and I think maybe Alex of That Arnold Life has mentioned that, right? The possibility that what Indy has in the classroom scene after the South America sequence, he opens up a bunch of artifacts and shows Marcus, oh, these are good pieces, Marcus. That's perhaps being retconned as one of these stones. So Easter Island is the first on the list, and it is a place that Indy's already visited and worked on an excavation for in Rob McGregor's Interior World. So as one of the only references to him using a trowel of all things to find Rongo Rongo tablets to decipher. Rongo Rongo is an undeciphered, but has eluded archaeologists since the 19th, 20th century, and it does fit the Giants narrative in some ways, because these Moai statues actually have bodies and arms. Easter Island was also the home of the Tatu Manu ritual of the Birdman religion, and where inhabitants would jump into the water to try to race and get the first egg of the season from the sooty tern bird, and they would climb to the highest point and declare the winner if they gotten to the top first. Parazawari, or the pyramids of Piantikoya, they're actually natural sandstone formations. They may have been really known locally for a very long time, but these mounds were only published, or these formations were only published in the 1970s in any scholarly literature, and that's after this patterning of mounds was noted in satellite images. It's interesting to feature it in the 1930s because this would not have been known to Indy in the 1930s unless maybe he heard it from someone locally, but it could just be an anachronism where they just have it anyways, right? MP40s, for example, are guns that would not have been available in 1936, but are featured in Raiders. Same with the RPG or that Indy uses when he points at the arc at the end. So yeah, past investigations show that they are not artificial pyramids, and it's not really a point of research or noted in archaeological literature as a result, though it is a tourist destination. As an Andeanist, as someone who's worked in North South America for the better part of 10 years, I've never really heard of this location. There's very little published on it in general, and in the region, I'm not familiar enough with the landscape of this part of South America to know what settlements are around. And there's also very dense vegetation, looking at photos of this area. Machu Picchu is on the map, of course, being one of the most famous sites, even though it isn't actually, in terms of its history, a very important site of major activities. It's really more of a very late 1400s, 1500s center, hidden the mountainside for the Inca Emperor Pachacuti originally. And in terms of within Indy's time period, yeah, it was actually a very well known at the time in the growing up in high school. I think even Young Indiana Jones Chronicles has him suggesting to Nancy's father about how to get Tom Swift out of Machu Picchu, and references, I think, a fictional idea of there being maybe secret tunnels underneath, which there are not, unfortunately. But yeah, so again, how this fits into it, not really clear. But it does seem like they're trying to create a pattern between Machu Picchu, Nazca, Baratoari, and Oya de Tambo. Interestingly, another site also originally built by the Inca Emperor Pachacuri, same person as the one that began the construction of Machu Picchu, also built in the state here, and that's included in our list of sites. And this one, though, is in many ways more well known after the Spanish conquest as the fortified center of a resistance against Spanish under Manco Inca Yupanqui. And it's the site of a major battle between the Spanish and the Inca. Nazca, Peru is also on the map, which we've seen Indy visit in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, though that's in 1957, so decades later. Quite reasonable for that neighborhood. And in the 30s, that would have actually been quite a new, relatively new discovery for Indy's generation. And he references it while trying to translate Ox's little piece of paper, though they do take a little bit of creative license with where they place the lines. So the Chalchilla cemetery is depicted on this hill, and in real life it's actually not. It doesn't afford such a beautiful view of the Nazca lines, and particularly of those ones, the spider and the hummingbird, which are depicted here next to each other. Here's a comparison of actually how far away they are from each other. It's about thanks to Google Maps. The next site is Tassili Nasher, which is also in Algeria, which is also the one that wasn't seen in previous promo images. But it's an interesting choice because it's a Neolithic site, so it's one of the earlier, I think if not the earliest site on this list. And it's a settlement for pastoralists, and it's most famous for its rock art and paintings. And it was noted in publications around the 1910s, so only a couple of decades before this Great Circle adventure happens. Siwa, which I think we've seen a bit of footage of already. It's an oasis, and it's the location of the Temple of Amun and the location of a priestly oracle, and it was so important that Alexander the Great marched across the Libyan desert and visited this oracle, who declared that he was the son of Ra, and therefore able to become a pharaoh. So it is, from a historical standpoint, a very important site in many ways. This was the impetus for justifying why Alexander the Great, who is not Egyptian, could become a pharaoh. And it's actually a very beautiful looking site located, I think, on an elevated and a promontory. So we have, of course, Giza in Egypt, and many of you may already know of it. It's where the Great Pyramids are. It's an Old Kingdom site predominantly, and we've gotten multiple views of Indy scrolling or moving his map around. It seems like the map is projected onto this notebook journal, and I guess you could slide it around because it does cut off at the edges here. So here's some older maps that this map was probably based off of. It's been mapped many, many different times. You probably would have been able to get a good, decent map by the 1930s. And here's my overlay of the different pyramids and how they're oriented on this map. So we actually have a fair number of the actual features of the site. We have Khufu, we have Khafre, of course. We have the Sphinx and the Temple of the Sphinx, which seems to be an area where the Germans are digging around in the game, so it's possible they're trying to link it to more kind of pseudoscientific or kind of conspiracy theories about the Sphinx having something around or underneath it. And yeah, and you have a bunch of these funerary temples where the pharaoh would be worshipped from afar, and where the funerary processions bringing the pharaoh to the pyramid to be entombed. You see some of the processionary pathways as well. Here's another view of the complex itself, if you'd like to reference back to it. Yeah, and so there are also a few tombs of queens as well. It'll be interesting to see to what degree that they really follow the landscape of these different sites. I mean, it's shaping up to be pretty damn accurate, but I would imagine it's possible they would try to cut out some of the smaller elements, some of the cemetery maybe. Yeah, so you can see from this, still, it's been circulating for a while, yeah, you can see most of the focus seems to be around the Sphinx itself. And I think some of the footage actually shows like a giant hole next to the base of the Sphinx on the left-hand side here. And of course, for those who have watched the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, this is not the first time that Indy's been at the Pyramids of Giza. He's been around there since he was a young kid on Senior's World Lecture Tour, and also where he first met T.E. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia, on his bicycle, which is one of his pen pals and friends all the way into the World War and probably to until his early demise, unfortunately. And of course, Lawrence of Arabia is the one who also inspires Indy to learn the languages of the cultures that he encounters. There's a wonderful clip of this fictional Lawrence telling him that it is the thing that unlocks cultures that he should learn. That's really, to Indy's credit, his characterization. While stuffy academic archaeologists like me might critique sometimes, it is a wonderful thing that the character does actually learn the language, ancient and modern, of the regions that he visits. Maybe not necessarily so much in the movies, but in the expanded canon. Interestingly, Petra is also on the list. It's highly unlikely we'll get to visit Petra. If we do, it'd be kind of a little strange to see it again, particularly the so-called treasury, which we see doubling as the Grail Temple in the Canyon of the Crescent Moon in the Last Crusade. I mean, though it would be cool if we could ride horses through the canyon itself. I mean, that would be pretty awesome. But I doubt that they would really have to try to find a way to work around the fact that it looks exactly like what in that universe would be the Grail Temple. So, Ur is another very well-known site in the Near East or Middle East, Sumerian city that was excavated by Leonard Woolley, roughly around Indy's time generation between the Chronicles and currently in the 1930s. And it's most well known for the Ziggurat of Ur, which we saw some reference to in the initial teaser trailer, back when it was still just a concept art sweep over his desk. It's also known for its rural cemetery and its this lizard woman that was found there, which has been subject to a lot of fringe reinterpretation as well. Leonard Woolley also is relevant because he excavated with T. Lawrence of Arabia. Before the war occurred, they both worked at a site called Carchemish. So it's possible. Maybe Indy will reference knowing him as a colleague, because he would have also still been active in the 1930s. Persepolis is another famous and very exciting one. It's the ceremonial capital of the Achaemenid Empire in Persia, modern day Iran. And as you can see just from this picture here, there's a lot of beautiful, amazing wall friezes that is kind of almost the crystallization, the culmination of earlier developments in artistic traditions. So a lot of this draws from previous Neo-Assyrian art in palatial artwork. So I would love to be able to walk through this and just kind of go through each and every frieze, see how accurate they go through, but also just the kinds of narratives told in each. Mohenjo-Daro in modern-day Pakistan, and one of the major centers of the Indus Valley civilization, is featured, and it's really cool to see. It has some of the earliest game pieces ever found in the whole world. The Indus Valley civilization is probably known for being, I think, the first evidence of dice found anywhere in the world as well. You also have figures of elites on the right-hand side that we don't really know who they are per se. Potentially, at least they're hypothesized to be so. We also have a writing system that is also yet to be deciphered. Another major object from this site is the Pashupati seal, and it's been hypothesized originally as a Proto-Shiva image, maybe, or possibly it's another deity. It's being debated whether if you see what's on the side of the figure's face, whether it's a nose and a mouth on each side, so which would be more Shiva-like, or whether it's more like a bull deity, potentially, among other kind of hypotheses about it, who this figure could be. Interestingly, they also choose Khajuraho, also this one is in India, and yeah, it's both a Hindu and a Jain temple complex. There's numerous different temples, but I think in some ways, and I don't think this would be a feature of the actual game, but it's oddly enough known for many ways to the public for its funny erotic depictions on the sides of some of the structures. So PI is a bit of a mystery as well, because it doesn't necessarily refer to an archaeological site, but a place with many archaeological sites. Could be many temples in the town that could be referencing. More specifically, the ancient site that would be around that area would be Sri Ksetra, which is a settlement of what's known as the Pew civilization. Another thing to go into afterwards, in terms of depending on what it actually ends up being in the game, I could try to go over more details about these sites and maybe their significance and how they were woven into the plot itself, when we actually know what the plot itself really is. But you can see, even from a few photos of this area, it's got very evocative architecture. It's got this area by the water with lots of different niches full of Buddha statues, which would be a pretty cool thing to go through in a level. But part of me doubts that this would be featured, given that perhaps would be a little bit redundant after visiting all the Buddhist architecture at Sukhothai. Then again, who's to say you can't have more Buddhist architecture in your game? Uncharted 2, for example, does a lot of that. Prerelease in Cambodia is actually a site that I've been to with my advisor during our work in near the Thai-Cambodia border. It's aside from doing Peru, I've also worked in Cambodia for a few seasons, and yeah, it's built on this massive cliff on Dangret Mountains, and it's a contentious site between the Thais and with Cambodia as well. And there's definitely soldiers all over the place there to guard it. And it's, again, was built under and occupied by the Khmer Empire. And so, again, same polity that was really in charge of Sukhothai for much of its history. And it's a Shavite temple as well. So there seems to be a theme with maybe Shiva being relevant. Sukhothai in Siam, or modern day Thailand, is a major focus of a lot of the previews. It is definitely probably going to be one of the major levels that we'll get to see. In real life, there are a lot of moats. There is a lot of water around, but not. I don't believe it's quite to the extent that you have to take a boat everywhere as we do in the game. So they are kind of, I think, hyping that aspect up. But then again, they're also adding a lot more vegetation, of course, which would make sense back in the day, perhaps. This building, though, a lot of the other scenes that we've seen in Deep Dive, they look a lot like actual structures, and they definitely model structures off of the real thing. Though I think this very famous, I think, concept art of it, they really kind of, whoever did this bit really tried to make it look a little bit pyramidal, which is not the case in terms of the actual site. It might just be overgrowth turning into looking like that. So I have a book on the site, but I haven't seen a Buddha statue or Buddhist statue that's quite like the one on the right hand side that we see in the previews. Though we do have a lot of other evocative images of massive statues at the site. So part of me thinks that this might be a fictionalized version of it. Like, well, it is a fictionalized version, but like fictional, like a creative license was taken with some of these statues. But it is a good choice. Is actually Sukhothai isn't a very well studied site in many ways, at least in terms of kind of a lot of literature, academic literature on the subject, or dedicated field work, though it is a well-known site in Thailand. It is absolutely something that's not very well known outside of Thailand, I believe. And yeah, a lot of these structures where maybe this statue on the right hand side would also be in, and these things called us, so they're kind of these rectangular buildings containing a statue within it. And yeah, as you can see, even in one of them, it has this kind of almost cruciform open roof area. That is also pretty awesome. Definitely something I'm going to put on my bucket list of places to visit sometime now. And finally, again, going back to this unknown region before we go back to Easter Island, is this area, these islands, possibly New Caledonia, possibly Vanuatu, possibly Fiji. In Vanuatu, there is an island that they've named Mystery Island for the sake of it. But outside of that, in terms of really big sites or sites that might be of interest for the story, it's not really so clear to me. But it'd be really good to hear if anybody's familiar with that area. Thoughts pre-release are that you're looking at very different time periods, and that really complicates what these stones are supposed to be or what they represent or do. And the power of the artifacts is still very much a mystery. I know Kevin, an Indiana Jones nerd, he has talked a little bit about what he's heard about and what he's seen in terms of them each perhaps having powers. And that might be the case. But we are looking at many different sites, it seems. And depending on how big this actual game is, supposedly we have like 30 hours, 4 hours of just cutscenes alone. So it's possible that there are a few more hidden levels that we haven't heard about yet. That could be one of these points on the map. And it is a mix of real life sites that doesn't necessarily have a degree of consistency to them. They're vastly different types of ritual sites, settlements. Not all of them are as kind of ritually charged as others. Some of them are large city centers. In terms of making the Great Circle make sense, and this is where, right, if one were to really look at the archaeology of it, the history of it, it's not really, you can't really connect them very well, reasonably, so, with the actual history. So maybe it's some sort of fictional power connecting from Neolithic to Alexander the Great, etc., and maybe the stones originated in Tassili as the oldest site. Then I mean, you can look, if you look at the rock art, some of that rock art, that imagery could be repurposed, I guess, for or used to express, I guess, the power of these stones, maybe. And maybe at this classic MacGuffin storytelling device of having them spread across the world, I guess, could be how it's shaping up to be. Maybe increased strength, maybe some sort of power, and maybe the Order of the Giants are people who are connected to the original stones and had whatever power it gives, but wants to keep it out of other people's hands. And I mean, several of the sites listed are major cities of the ancient world. Mohenjo-daro, Alexander the Great's empire covers a large part of the map, but it wouldn't explain Peru or much of Asia, as he famously never went further. And that said, maybe some part of that story could be that Alexander manages to become the pharaoh instead of being said that he is the son of Ra. He gets a magical stone at Siwa. It could, as Kevin and others have mentioned, be a part of bringing in some ancient race of giants, Nephilim or other mythologies that would reference an age of giants existing before in the past. But I really do think Alexander's conquest could be part of this narrative. It would make sense for why Siwa is there in particular, unless they have another reason for referencing Siwa. But then they would need to build the background, because I think outside of Alexander, you'd have to really give the background to it. And regardless of what it is, it's not clearly grounded in an existing mythology or historical object as far as I can see. Like the Ark, the Sankara stones, or the Shivalinga, the Grail, Crystal Skull, or even the Dial are all either based off of a real object or based off of an idea of it in mythology, which does lend itself to being, I guess, more like Creative Atlantis, where you're building off of something more made up. So that might be a challenge, depending on how I think fans and gamers react to it, because sometimes I think some people really want to keep it to it being religious items, mythological items, and other people don't really mind if it's kind of more fantastical, like the skull or the dial being more of a science fiction element instead. Sorry, also tacking on another element to it, I didn't discuss when I initially recorded it, is potentially the fact that we have several different Hindu temple complexes, or rather, in many cases, including Shaivite temples, so temples dedicated to Shiva, so it's possible that we are going to see a return of the use of Shiva as kind of supernatural figure being part. Maybe it relates back to the stones, which would be kind of funny given Andy's last adventure in 1935 involved Sankara stones. For sure, it seems like Giza, Sukhothai, at least, will be the playable ones that are on this globe, but the majority of them will not be the points that we see on the circle, unless, again, there are these hidden levels that we haven't seen. Again, we see that there are artifacts in the Vatican, so that supports the idea that a lot of these artifacts may have been from the sites that we see on the globe, but have been since displaced, collected by other people. Himalayas as well, similarly, is also not on this map. Well, Himalayas is on the map, but it's in a point on this globe. And that's about it, everyone. Thanks for watching, and I sure hope that we get an amazing game that will spawn a whole trilogy or even more Indiana Jones games, and we don't have to wait another 20 years like we've had since Steph King's came out. But in the meantime, if you are interested in this type of content, if you're interested in the real-life archaeology of Indiana Jones, Tomb Raider, the Mummy series, please check out my channel. I've done comprehensive breakdowns of as many of the artifacts and levels of the first Tomb Raider game that I have, and also the Netflix series as well. So please check that out. I'm going to be making more content on Indiana Jones, maybe in the next couple months, or switch it back into the Tomb Raiders series as well, depending on my schedule and my thesis writing schedule. But please like, subscribe, click the notification button. I hope to see you next time.